Well, good morning. Welcome back to our virtual Sunday school for Central Baptist Church. Thank you guys for tuning in, also for all the feedback that you gave, not just for Sunday school, but the entire online worship experience at Central Baptist Church. You know how many hours that folks have put into that, and we're so thrilled that you enjoyed the opportunity to still worship even though you're doing it from your homes. Also appreciate all the things that Sunday schools have done to reach out to one another, to reach out to folks in the church to make sure they're okay, but also just to share together. And different classes have done different things, from Zoom meetings to email strands or just phone calls. But thank you for doing that. Keeping people in the forefront, keeping the prayer requests in the forefront, taking the opportunity to spend time in the Word and to pray for each other. So important. This morning, we're going to have our final lesson in 1 Samuel. And so I look forward to taking you through that. But before we do that, I want to share something with you. This is a fortune cookie. My family and I had the opportunity several years ago to live in Singapore for a couple of years, and I have worked all over Asia, from Japan to China to Malaysia to Hong Kong, Indonesia, and in Singapore. And so one of the things that our family loves to do is to eat Chinese food. And what would a Chinese meal be unless you ended it with a fortune cookie? So I'm going to open this fortune cookie this morning, and let's see what's inside. So we'll crack this thing open and look at our fortune, and it says, "You will soon embark on a business venture." Well, that's interesting. You know, our family, when we do this, if we don't like the fortune we get, we just open another cookie. How would you like to have to use a fortune cookie to determine the next step you take in life? To make a decision about, do I go right or left, up or down? To use a fortune cookie to discern how you're going to take your next steps. That would be a very difficult thing, wouldn't it? How much confidence would you have in that fortune? I don't know if I'll soon have another business venture or not, but that's exactly where King Saul found himself. As we have spent the last several weeks in Samuel, you know that King Saul was installed as the first king of the Israelite monarchy. It was a divine appointment made by Samuel at the request of the people. And God gave them the king they wanted. As you recall, Samuel was a foot taller than anybody else, a very good-looking man, a little shy, but he was ordained by God through Samuel to be God's representative for the Israelite people. And as you recall, over the 42-year reign that King Saul had, the first few years were very good because he was very close to the Lord. But over time, he increased and God increased. It's been said that that his personhood decayed, his character was corrupted, his success diminished. His story represents a very long decline that ends in a very sad conclusion, which we'll talk about today. So the first thing I want to do is go to the 27th chapter of Samuel. And there, once again, King Saul is bent on finding David. And so David decides, one of these days I'm going to be destroyed by the hand of Saul. It says in the first verse there of chapter 27. The best thing I can do is escape to the land of the Philistines. And if I do that, Saul will not follow me. And so that's exactly what he did. He and his 600 men and their wives and families went to Achish, the son of Maog, king of Gath. And they settled there in the land of the Philistines to basically get away from Saul in a little town called Ziklag. And it worked. Saul did not follow him. So as David lived there under the rule of the king, he also helped the king as they fought wars. But then as we go to the 28th chapter, we see in the very first verse that the Philistines gathered their forces to fight against Israel itself. And Achish came to David and said, "You have to understand, you and your men are going to accompany me with the army into battle." And David responded to him, "You'll see for yourself what this servant can do." And Achish was very pleased with that. He said, "I'm going to make you my personal bodyguard." As it turns out, the generals of the Philistine army didn't really like the idea of David coming with them along with his troops, because their fear was that he would turn during the battle and take the battle to the Philistines rather than the Israelites. And basically, they didn't trust him. And so David was left behind to fight in this battle. But as the scripture tells us, the battle lines formed. And in doing so, the king of Israel, Saul, the anointed one, saw the Philistine army, and he was so afraid. Fear gripped him. And it was at that point that he wanted to reach out to God, but God was nowhere to be found. You see, the choices that he had made had separated him from God to the point that God did not hear him anymore. Now, back during the very beginning of Saul's monarchy, he followed the Torah. He followed the words that God had given to Abraham to Moses, and that Moses had then again given to the people before they went into the Promised Land. And simply, if we look back at those words in Leviticus and Deuteronomy, it basically says that any man or a woman who is a medium or spiritualist among you must be put to death. They must be removed from the Israelites. And so that's exactly what Saul did. He had basically removed those from the Israelite community. But he, at this point, was so afraid that he sought out a medium. He actually went to his men and said, "Do you know of a medium who is nearby?" And there was one that they knew in a town called Endor, which was about 6 miles away from where they were camped. And so Saul covered himself, disguised himself, and went 6 miles under darkness to see the medium. And when they arrived, they had a conversation, and the medium was a little bit suspicious of this person that had come to her. And so she said, "You know, it's been said that mediums should not be in Israel, or around the Israelites. And so as a result, are you trying to trick me? Are you trying to get me to tell you who I am so that then you can kill me?" And Saul assured her that was not the case. And so Saul said, "I want you to seek out for me Samuel." Well, the medium did just that, and what happened was, out came this man. But it wasn't a man, it was really a spirit. You see, Samuel had passed away, and so Saul lost his direct contact to God. Remember, he wanted him to be with him, and he even ripped his coat away from Samuel, and Samuel said, "That's an example of what God is going to do to your kingdom." And so Saul was desperate. He would talk to a spirit and try to discern from it what he should do. You see, in those days, there were many times that people sought God. They might have sought him, and God delivered a message through a dream. Remember the dream of Jacob or the dream of Joseph. There were times when they would cast lots to determine which path do I take. Is someone guilty or innocent? The Urim and the Thummim were two stones that were worn on the breastplate of the high priest, and they were used to make decisions that they believed were God ordained. And of course, then there was also prophets like Samuel like Nathan that would be there for David. But Saul didn't have any of those, and so he chose the Spirit. Well, when when Samuel came forth as a spirit, even the medium shrieked. And then she realized that this was King Saul, and she became very afraid. But Saul, once again, said, don't worry, I just need to hear the words from Samuel. And so he told Samuel, the army of the Philistines is about to engulf us. What should I do? What's the outcome going to be? And the spirit of Samuel said, why are you calling me? You have separated yourself from God. And Saul said, I'm in great distress, and that's the reason I've called you. And so the spirit of Samuel said in verse 18, because you did not obey the Lord or carry out his fierce wrath against the Amalekites, the Lord has done this to you today. The Lord will deliver both Israel and you into the hands of the Philistines. And tomorrow, you and your sons will be with me. Remember, this is the Spirit talking. The Lord will also give the army of Israel into the hands of the Philistines. Well, Samuel was just mortified. He fell down on the ground full of fear. He had lost everything. And so the very next day, as we look and as it's recorded in the scriptures, indeed, that's exactly what happened. Saul lived to see his sons killed. So if you'll turn to the 31st chapter of 1 Samuel, you'll see the Philistines in verse 1 fought against Israel, and the Israelites fled before them, and many fell dead on Mount Gilboa. The Philistines were in hot pursuit of Saul and his sons, and they killed his 3 sons, including Jonathan. And as the fighting grew more fierce, Saul was actually mortally wounded. And he turned to his shield bearer, his armor bearer, and he said, draw your sword and run me through before these uncircumcised fellows come and run me through and abuse me. But the armor bearer was terrified and filled with fear, and so he didn't do it. And so Saul pulled his own sword out and fell on it. The end of Saul was not a pretty one. So from the first king of the monarchy to him taking his own life on a battlefield was all the result of the choices that he made. You know, it says throughout the Old Testament that if we will live a life that is focused on God and obey God, then life will be a blessing. But if you disobey God, then life will be a frustrating failure. That comes from the 28th chapter of Deuteronomy. I think it's fair to say Saul's life had ended in a very frustrated failure. So what choices do we make? Are we going to sow good seeds and therefore reap a good harvest? Are we going to trust the Lord and let Him be with us as we go through times of trial and tribulation? For God tells us in His Scriptures that nothing can separate us from the love of God if we just reach out and hold on to it. I want to share something with you this morning. It comes from Martin Luther. For you folks that appreciate history, Martin Luther lived through an outbreak of bubonic plague in Wittenberg, Germany. Sound familiar? Luther lived before people really understood how disease germs were spread, and yet he offered some very wise advice, this author of the Great Reformation. I want to read these words to you. These are actually his very own words. I shall ask God mercifully to protect us. Then I shall fumigate, help purify the air, administer medicine, and take it myself. I shall avoid places and persons where my presence is not needed in order to not become contaminated, and thus perchance inflict or pollute others, so cause their death as a result of my negligence. However, if God should wish to take me, He's surely going to find me, but I will have done what He has expected of me. So I'm not responsible for my own death or the death of others. If my neighbor needs me, I shall not avoid the place or person, but go freely. See, this is such a God-fearing faith because it's a faith that is neither brash nor foolhardy and does not tempt God. You know, these words were spoken by Martin Luther way before he understood, or we understood, how viruses spread, what it means to social distance, what it means to protect yourself and take yourself apart from others as a step first to honor you and honor the life God gave you, but also honor the life God gives others. And yet in the middle of this, he still found a way to reach out, knowing that if he did, he was honoring God's command to love one another. He also demonstrated the peace of God, which transcends all understanding. Remember, Paul wrote about that in Philippians. Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything by prayer and petition with thanksgiving, present your request to God, and the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. Those are great words for us to think about during this time of a global pandemic. But I want you to remember, Paul wrote those words from a prison cell. So he knows what he speaks of. Folks, this week I wish you blessings. Please continue to be in prayer for all the folks who are on the front lines, who are serving in hospitals, in medical centers. Be in prayer for those who are working in grocery stores and truckers that are delivering supplies, and everyone that's coming together to produce things that will help stop the spread of this virus. Be in prayer for those who are working on treatments and on vaccines. Be in prayer for those who have lost so much in such a short period of time. But most of all, I want you to thank God, because in the middle of this, God, just like He did for King David, if you honor Him, God will always be there for you. He will never forsake you. I hope you have a blessed week, and we'll see you next week on Palm Sunday. There's going to be a special lesson that Garland has written, and he's going to be delivering that to you, and I know you'll not want to miss it, as this is the Palm Sunday. God bless you. Thank you very much. Have a good day. Bye-bye.